Do not adjust your digital device. What you are about to see and hear may shock and appall you. Join our hosts as they encounter countless thrills, spills, chills, and hilarity as they explore the very weirdest in pop culture. The following media is so strange, so beyond the scope of what is normal, it will make you ask the question, why does this exist? Hello everybody and welcome to another episode of Why Does This Exist? I'm Chris.
And I'm Rob.
And today we have a show about one of the greatest video games of all time. It's one of my favorites. Maybe one day I'll get a tattoo of things on there. I've thought about getting something related to it, but I have no idea what. We're talking about a game that's more than meets the eye. And it's not the Transformers. It's much better. There's a philosophical edge to it. There's quantum physics involved. There's Anne Rind and an amalgam of her name as the main protagonist, as the main antagonist of the story, or what you would think would be. And of course, there's twists that M. Night Shyamalan wishes that he wrote.
Yeah.
We're talking about the Bioshock games, and they've got a fourth one on the way. So there's 3 in total with a baby on the way. 5, well, actually 6 if you count the System Shock games, which we will speak about. But let's run by our spiel really quick for everyone involved. We are Why Does This Exist? We are a podcast that talks about the very weirdest in pop culture, whether it's a video game like we are about to do, whether it is a movie that bends the fabric of law and law teaching and education and filmmaking, like we just did several weeks ago when we spoke about My Cousin Vinny. Or we talk about weird products, weird TV shows, or anything else. Strange music, or just really anything that exists in this world and will exist. We're going to talk about it at some point in time, because we need to ask the question, why does this exist? Because you didn't. Or maybe you did, but I'm not in your head. Maybe I don't want to be. I know you don't want to be in my head. It's scary. But you can find us wherever you find any of your podcasts. If you've been listening to us, you already know what we do and you know where to find us. And if you don't, then good luck. You're going to be in for a bumpy ride. You can find us wherever you get your podcasts. You can find us on social media. That's Facebook at facebook.com/whydoesthisexistpod, I believe. You can also find us over on Twitter. That's twitter.com/WDTEpod. You can support us on our YouTube channel. It's Why Does This Exist with a question mark. It's facebook.com/whydoesthisexistpod. You can also check out our website, whydoesthisexistpod.com, where our man Tony is constantly writing new articles. Like every now and then, he's actually going to be writing something on Merciful Fate pretty soon, who just announced their tour, actually. And if you want to hear a little bit more about Merciful Fate and King Diamond, you can go in the Wayback Machine and you can find our old episode from last October, chronicling the music and awesomeness of King Diamond. And you can also support us by giving us cold hard cash. That's right. Patreon.com/whydoesthisexist. Give us as little as $1. We'll let you into the Discord server and you can go off on whatever it is you want to go off. You get access to the schedule, so you know what we're going to do and we're going to do it before anybody else. And there's probably a bunch of other things that I can't quite remember, but you can interact with us and talk to us, and maybe if we get enough of you, we'll just do some live chats and we'll just answer your questions. We don't even have to record it, but we could brainstorm some ideas with you. Wouldn't that be fun?
Yeah.
Oh, glory whoopee-dee. All right. But if you want to support us in private, you can also just email us at whydoesthisexistshow@gmail.com, and we would appreciate that as well. Especially if you're Nigeria, who tends to really enjoy the show. For some reason, we're number For some reason, we've been ranked number 1 in Nigeria at various points during the year and a half that we've been in existence. Don't ask me why, but I'll take it. Anyway, that's the news. Here's the weather. You are now about to witness the strength of street knowledge from a ragtag group of rogues.
Botch.
So let's get on with the goddamn show. Yes, Botchamania, Bioshock, Biobotch,
Botchamania.
the Wizard of Botch.
Anyway, Bioshock. So you had said that, Bioshock is your favorite game.
One of my favorite games. It's my favorite. It's my favorite game over the past. I want to say the past decade the past decade to 20 years. It is in my top 3. My favorite. It's probably number 3. My first 2 are Banjo-Kazooie and Mega Man X. Not necessarily in that order. Actually, no, in the reverse order. My favorite game is Mega Man X. My second favorite game is Banjo-Kazooie. My third favorite game is the Bioshock series.
So, the series. And I was going to ask, what is your favorite Bioshock?
My favorite Bioshock is Infinite, and we'll get into why.
All right. So, I played Bioshock. I've played extensively the first Bioshock. I never played the second one. And I played Infinite, but I only played it for a little bit because I was not that big of a fan of it.
I didn't like 2 the first time that I played it. I actually didn't finish it for many years.
A lot of people don't like 2. It's kind of like the redheaded stepchild of the Bioshock series a little bit.
But I think it's underrated. Like, now that I've played it and beaten it and there's more going on that you have to think about that's not necessarily laid out. That, like, once you, think about how deep the story actually is psychologically, you're like, oh man, this is actually really good, and it makes total sense.
Yeah, I think it was a different team that worked on the Bioshock 2, that's why.
I believe it was a mostly very different team. I know Ken Levine had nothing to do with it, really.
Yes. So, before we get into that...
So, creative, it was very different.
Yeah, let's go back to the origins.
And there were some mechanics that I wasn't crazy about, but we'll get into that.
Yeah, so the origins of the Bioshock series come from all the way back in the 90s in a game studio called Looking Glass Studios, which developed a number of games, but most famously probably System Shock. And System Shock was at the time a pretty, it was a pretty ahead of its time game because it was a first-person shooter, but it added a lot of RPG elements, puzzle solving, and all these different things. And it was a really interesting game. It was very. I never played the first one. I played System Shock 2. System Shock 2 was very difficult. And I believe System Shock 1 was as well. But there's a lot of RPG elements. And so, Bioshock... So, anyway, I'm getting ahead of myself. Looking Glass Games developed System Shock. In the later 90s,
early, 94, System Shock 1 came out.
Right, well, I'm talking now, so, yeah, it became Irrational Games. So, Irrational Games was another studio that was founded by former employees of Looking Glass. Most notably Ken Levine, who we had mentioned before. Ken Levine is essentially the brains behind Bioshock. He was the creative director at Looking Glass Studios, which developed it. Looking Glass Studios eventually became, after they were acquired by Take-Two Interactive, became 2K Boston and 2K Australia. It was split into 2 different companies, and that's when they developed Bioshock. When they were Irrational Games...
Hey, Levine's from Queens.
Oh, really? Well,
yeah. Well, unless Wikipedia is lying, Levine was born in Flushing, New York, to a Jewish family. That's all we need to know for now. He's Ken Levine. He made games. He's cool.
Irrational Games made System Shock 2, which was the one I played. And again, System Shock 2 was very difficult. It was a again role-playing game. It's also has elements of survival horror, which became kind of a staple of the Bioshock series. Was first-person shooter with RPG and survival horror elements, basically.
Mm-hmm.
And so, System Shock 2 takes place in space on like I think it's a ship that you're on or a space station. I don't remember. It's been a while since I played. So when
I wonder if Dead Space borrowed a little bit from System Shock 2.
Oh, I'm sure it did. System Shock 2 and System Shock 1 were a huge influence in a lot of later sci-fi shooter games, and especially like survival horror. So I am sure Dead Space took a lot of inspiration from System Shock 1 and 2, as did probably like Half-Life and a lot of games that were developed after it. So when they developed Bioshock was a spiritual successor to System Shock 2. It's obviously not a sequel because it takes place in a completely different setting, and the storyline is. I think
it originally started as a third System Shock game, and then they ended up changing their mind. I think there were things. I think creative ideas that were being kicked around ended up not making sense for System Shock anymore. I know it started with the sea slugs and all of like the upgrades and plasmids that you would do to yourself, and then they were just kind of like, okay, well, this is starting to deviate from the System Shock world a little bit more. So we might have to do something different.
Yes. So they decided to make Bioshock, which is much like how Perfect Dark is a spiritual successor to GoldenEye, like basically very similar game, very similar mechanics, similar engine, everything. It's basically the same thing with System Shock to Bioshock. Similar game with similar mechanics, but completely different setting, characters, and storyline.
Also, the System Shock trademark had been lapsed.
Yes.
Anyway.
Yes. So Bioshock came after 2K.
Oh, and actually, System Shock 3 did end up becoming Dead Space in a way.
Yeah,
which is kind of funny. So yes, it did take direct. It did take direct inspiration. In fact, it took all the inspiration.
Yeah. So when Take-Two Interactive acquired Irrational Games, they developed Bioshock, which again we just talked about was basically a spawn from System Shock. And Bioshock was, when it came out, it was pretty ahead of its time because it was it was a time where there were some RPGs that were first person shooterish, but it was still it was it was more like action first person shooters. You had more Call of Duties.
This was where Call of Duty was starting to become the main game, and FPSs were really becoming they were really becoming the leading genre, because it was really just that and Grand Theft Auto. That's all you ever heard of from video games around then. It was just Grand Theft Auto and Call of Duty and Halo. It was all just FPSs and GTA. There was nothing in between. Nobody cared about platformers unless it was God of War, which that was its own thing.
That's not really even a platformer.
Not even really a platformer. It's
just an action beat 'em up game, kind of.
Yeah. So it was. But for the most part, all you ever heard from anybody was either Call of Duty or Grand Theft Auto or both. Yeah. There was no room for any other games at that time.
Yeah. And there wasn't a lot of Fallout 3 came out around the same time as well. And that was again more of the RPG elements with first person shooter as just the backdrop. But it wasn't it hadn't caught on a lot yet. It was still kind of we were in this action, no one wanted to play RPGs, except there was a couple. Again, I'm not saying this was the rule, but it wasn't as big, there wasn't as many RPGs that were popular at the time. Anyway, so
other than World of Warcraft, really.
Right. Well, yeah. So MMOs, but that's a whole different story
different ball of wax.
Exactly. So, Bioshock came out, and also the combination of the RPG elements and also the survival horror elements, which like you're basically alone on this sunken city of Rapture.
Everybody's going crazy. It was it was meant to be a utopia, and for a short while it was, until its own laws and its own morals became corrupt.
Yes.
Which I think in the end, I think the moral of the story is just that mankind is always going to be corrupted no matter what you do with it.
You can never have a utopia.
No.
It's every time a utopia is tried, it like degenerates into like a fucking hellish, like it basically becomes a dystopia, which is what we have here.
Yeah.
So you play as
Jack.
Jack, and
if that is his real name,
yes, and you're on a plane flying over the ocean. The plane crashes, and you make your way to this lighthouse that's just like in the middle of nowhere, and you get on a bathysphere and go down.
We assume you're the only survivor.
Yes, yeah. You're basically you kind of wake up and you're just surrounded by like wreckage and fire, and you have to swim to like the lighthouse, which is like
you're like conveniently floating on a raft.
Yes. So you go down through this bathysphere to the.
It's almost as if you knew what you were doing the entire time.
Exactly, which we'll get to. And you go down into this city of Rapture, which is this huge underwater, like metropolis, like giant skyscrapers all underwater.
Beautifully done. It's rendered very, like the artwork is the coolest thing about this game.
Yeah, it's an Art Deco style, so it's like very much like that 1940s New York City vibe.
Yes,
or like Gotham City.
Yes, it's very much mastered. It's very much like mastered and like drawn, like the art pieces of the time, where it was the American industrial paintings used, or they used various oils to make everything shiny, and like the like people weren't like prominently detailed, so you had like those old sailor kind of tattoos, but the machinery and the buildings and the architecture was heavily detailed, and the contrast works really well. I actually really enjoyed those paintings. Where did we were at a museum earlier this year where we saw where they had a whole industrial exhibit, and I can't. Yes, we were in the MoMA, which normally I hate that museum, but this was one of the rare occasions where they actually had something good in there, and they had a really nice like Industrial Revolution section for a minute in the American wing, and it was all of these like cool old these old like 1984-ish Atlas Shrugged kind of things, where it was like where it was all about we're real men, and we're going to work in the steel yard, and you should be working, and dignity, and go to the army, and Uncle Sam wants you, and all that stuff. And that particular art style, it's beautiful, and it's also tragic in the same way, because like I said, the detail is not focused on the humans. Like they have some detail to them, and they have like a shine to them, and it evokes pride and patriotism. But the true detail is given to the background items. It's given to the industry. It's given to the machines. It's given to the buildings. If it's given to like robots and things. If they show robots, but the focus is clearly not like, even though mankind is in the forefront, it's not the true focus of that art style. It's like the detail is in the painting. The detail is in the detail. Like I said, is in the industry, which shows you that like it's sad, because you see like mankind that thinks, oh well, it's like we're the best, we're number one, we're doing it all, but it's really no one cares about you.
Mm-hmm.
Like the lack of detail is damning evidence that the industry is important and not your human life.
Mm-hmm.
Like, we only care about progress. We don't care about you.
Yes. Which is the perfect, like, backdrop of Rapture, because that's literally basically what, Rapture is like this, this place where there's no, where, I'll quote, the Wikipedia article, where Ryan wanted to create a utopia for society's elite to flourish outside of government control and petty morality.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's basically like, like big money over everything, kind of like out of control, unbridled like individualism, which, again, was the kind of the philosophy of Ayn Rand,
right?
Who heavily inspired the
right. Actually, I do have to read those books. I haven't read Ayn Rand's books. I've always wanted to. I remember in high school we had a choice. In high school, my teacher gave us a choice to read either that or something else, and I don't remember what it was. It may have been. I don't remember what the hell the book was, but nobody cared. So yes. Everyone was like half the class was just like, well, what's the shorter book? And I knew what it was because I played Bioshock, and I was like, oh man, I'd really like to read those. And of course nobody picked it because they were like, and she was like, okay, fine, I guess we'll do the shorter book then. And it seemed like she probably wanted to read Ayn Rand.
I've only read one Ayn Rand book, and that was Anthem, which was it was an interesting story. It's basically like this like dystopian future where like this man, like humanity has no like self identity anymore, and basically like it's it's supposed to be like, oh, this is like like the future of like pure communism where there's no such thing as the individual anymore. It's only like this, society, basically. Mm-hmm. It's an interesting read. But basically he like breaks free of that and goes to like live on his own and stuff. It's an interesting. I mean,
honestly, it's probably better that I read this stuff a little bit later in life, because I think even though I would have enjoyed it in high school, I don't think I would have fully understood it.
No, it's really hard. It's it's hard to understand. It's very deep philosophical text. It's like reading Huxley or George Orwell, which we had to read in high school. But it's you don't really understand unless you read it like after high school.
Like I liked reading Orwell, but at the time, like I got it a little bit, but like it's one of those things where like it sticks with you, and then years later you're like, oh, that's what they were talking about.
Yes.
Because you start to see it in the real world. I mean, it's one of those things where you don't understand it until you see it in the real world, and then you're like, oh, crap, okay. But speaking of reading, I want to thank Holtzfeuer for who was on the Twins episode. I'm reading the Joseph Campbell book, The Hero with 1,000 Faces. So thank you, which I rented from my local public library, which is just across the street. Honestly, it's convenient. But I was able to take it out. Anyway, continue.
So anyway, the player find yourself on this, like, it basically by the time you get to Rapture, it's destroyed. It's like a friggin' hellscape. There, parts of it are leaking, flooded.
You take this thing called the bathysphere, and you go all the way from the surface level down to this beautiful underground city. But once you get out of the bathysphere, you realize it's already gone to hell.
Yes. And through a series of like, you find journals and you find like little like hints and clues all around, you learn that there was actually basically a war that happened here. And what happened was there was a con man named Frank Fontaine who kind of like started making all these illegal enterprises. He basically became like the mafia don of Rapture.
Yes.
But he's eventually killed by the police, and Andrew Ryan takes over all of his like resources, basically. But at the same time, this guy called Atlas kind of starts this rebellion in Rapture, and it comes to a head, and they go to a full-out war using these people known as splicers, who are basically just humans that are like addicted to plasmids, which are these like genetic altering substances that allow people to have superhuman abilities, basically.
Right, and the reasons that it got out of hand so much was part of Andrew Ryan's philosophy was no restrictions on anything.
Yes,
like just unbridled capitalism.
Yes,
with no limitations, no anything. Like when you first get in there, there's this big speech where Andrew Ryan introduces himself, and it's showing you like his issues with the government, with religion, and with communism, and he's telling you, no, my world is better. We're getting rid of all of that. So you won't have to deal with anything, because he's like I have issues with he's like, what good is this? He's like can a man even have the sweat of his own brow? I'm butchering the quote directly, but it's something like it's like at the end of a hard day's work, a man is only as good as the sweat on his brow, and does the sweat on the man's brow belong to him? And it's like no, says the government. It belongs to like one is like no, says the man in the White House or whatever it is. It belongs to the government, and then it's like no, says the man in the Vatican. It belongs to the church, and then it's like no, says the man in Moscow. It belongs to the people, or it belongs to everybody. And he's like, then like which Andrew Ryan is right in this instance, where he's like, no, that's bullshit. Like, why should my hard work get split up amongst people who didn't do anything for it? In some ways, his philosophies are right, where you could agree with, no, I shouldn't be taxed on certain things, or no, I shouldn't have income tax because I'm the one working. What does the government need it for? And they won't even tell me what they do with it. I'd be fine if the government told me what they did with my money, but they don't. So I don't really like taxes that much, because it ends up not going to anything that I voted for or would want ever. Like wars or anything. Like, I don't want that, but my tax money goes to it. But I also don't, like, this isn't something that I would ever want to spend my money on, but now I'm forced to in a roundabout way. And also, I like to give to charities and I like to help people, but I also don't want all of my money dispersed to people who didn't do anything. Yes. Like yes, I understand that too. Like, I don't want to give the guy across the street a third of my paycheck because at all, whether he's doing something or not. I don't want to give him a third of my paycheck. I don't know him. I earned the money. I understand that. At a basic level, I understand it. But, of course, it's like Andrew Ryan and his Bioshock, so this is, of course, taken into extreme contexts.
Yeah, it's beyond what is, normal. Like, this is, basically, and nothing... There is nothing that's unethical.
Right, it's an all-or-nothing philosophy, and that's what makes it broken. And, just to get to the third one is... I'm not a religious person. I'm not, if religion's your thing, good for you. It's not for me. But I don't want to give, because of that, I don't want to give the church my money. Right. But they might take a cut anyway, or whatever it is. Of course, I'm just speaking in hypotheticals, and, certain variables are true, but the point is, he doesn't, he's why should I give my money to people who don't deserve it? And, that's basically what he's saying, which, yeah, I can agree with that. But it's the extreme way that they do it, where it's oh, crap. Because there's no regulations with anything in Rapture, so because there's nothing in check, that's what ends up bringing it to hell, and Andrew Ryan ends up becoming he ends up being a problem. He ends up being a product of his own environment, and he ends up getting corrupted by his very own philosophies and becoming the very thing that he swore to be against. So he ends up becoming somewhat of a hypocrite. And it goes to hell, and you also have Frank Fontaine, who is trying to do his own thing, and suddenly Andrew Ryan wants a cut. Yeah. So it's like, oh wait, I thought it didn't matter how much money I made and I would keep all of it. Now you want a cut of it because I'm doing better than you? Like, what the hell is that? And that's basically what this whole thing starts off as. And it gets, of course, into more extreme levels with all the other things going on in the city. But the other problem with the plasmids and the splicers, which I took a while to get to, is science is not regulated. So there's
no ethics at all.
None. So the experiments are just wildly done, and they're just tested on the fly. So if something works, it works. And if it doesn't, then oh well. Like, there's
everybody dies.
Yeah. Basically, it's the science gets out of hand because everyone gets it, because people get pretty much everybody in Bioshock, in Rapture, gets addicted to the plasmids because you're granted to Adam, which you're granted ridiculous powers, and the way to harness the Adam, it's found in these sea slugs.
Yes.
And the sea slug, or they inject it into the scientists create it in a lab. It gives you all these wonderful powers that they sell, of course, because it's capitalism. And they inject it into the sea slugs, and the sea slugs, it's not appealing. So it's not aesthetically pleasing. Nobody says, "Oh, I'm going to eat a sea slug today, and then I'll be able to shoot fireballs." They're like it doesn't catch on, so they're like, ew, I have to eat the sea slug to get the fireballs? I don't think I want to do that. So they end up putting the sea slugs into these little girls and corrupting them, and they're called the Little Sisters, essentially, and they harvest Adam, and they make them into plasmids, and that of course gets out of hand too, and then they create the Big Daddies, because the people of Rapture end up trying to go after the Little Sisters, so they need protection. And they end up creating the Big Daddies, which are essentially, they're essentially deep sea divers and stragglers who came down to Rapture and were just taken against their will and transformed into these mechanized hulks. And their sole purpose is to they've been mutilated physically, and they've been grafted into this exoskeleton. Or endoskeleton.
No, it's an exoskeleton.
Okay, they get grafted into these bodies in these giant mech suits, basically, that look like big deep sea divers, and they're called the Big Daddy, and they're brainwashed into and they end up having a bond sharing a bond with the Little Sisters and imprinting on them. And they protect the Little Sisters in very violent ways.
Yes.
And that turns into its own issue. And you do become one in the second one, which we'll touch on.
Yes. Before we go on, let me just pause 1 second because I have to go say goodnight to William.
Okay.
I'll be right back. Hey. So, I think we were talking about where were we? So you come down to this to Rapture after everything is destroyed because of the war between Brian and Fontaine, and then eventually Atlas. And we talked about how the Big Daddies protect the Little Sisters, and
just how ethics is just shot to hell.
Yeah,
and
so
that's why the city is that's one of the main reasons why the city has gone to hell.
Yes,
it's been mostly because of Ryan turning into a hypocrite, Frank Fontaine not being who he says he is, and being a total con man. Because to get into Rapture, it wasn't just it wasn't a lottery or anything. It was kind of a lottery, but it was also he picked the best of the best. He picked the best minds, the best scientists, the best leaders, the best everything. The best artists. He picked the best people possible in the world, like the smartest people. He made sure that he picked the best people in the world to come to Rapture exclusively so that it could be a utopia, like the perfect city for the perfect people, for the best mankind has to offer. And one bad apple, Frank Fontaine, got into the bunch and spoiled everything. That's arguably the main reason, and also just Ryan's extreme values end up getting the best of not only him but also everything around him, because there's no limitations or restrictions on anything.
Yes.
And the lack of ethics is really what's damning with science, and it creates the splicers, and people get addicted and they start becoming ravenous to try to get all of these superpowers that are all temporary, and it melts their brain essentially. Yeah. Because there's no real testing. It's just, okay, here you go, let's see what happens.
Yes. So, you're going through, you're trying to figure out what happened to Rapture. You're trying to figure out how the hell to get out of there, and also what happened. And you eventually, this is where the M. Night Shyamalan level twists come in, where you get to Ryan's office, and he talks to you, and you learn your whole backstory, and Ryan is actually Jack's father, and you're Ryan's illegitimate son.
Mm-hmm.
And we're basically engineered by Tenenbaum, who is one of the doctors who was working with Fontaine. You were engineered by Tenenbaum and Fontaine to basically come back to Rapture and kill Ryan, essentially.
Mm-hmm.
And you realize that
and the guy and the scientist who creates the Little Sisters and Big Daddy is Dr. Yi Su Chung, who was a partner of Tenenbaum's, and
yes.
they didn't exactly agree on the morals and ethics of certain things.
Yes.
And I think Fontaine bribed Su Chung.
Yes. And so now, and then you realize...
Yeah, because Su Chung helped brainwash you.
Yes. And because, so this is what I was getting to, is that you realize throughout the whole game, every time you have an objective that you have to do, it's preceded by "would you kindly." So, whenever you're talking to Atlas over the radio, he's always like, "Oh, would you kindly do this?" or "Would you kindly do that?" And Ryan reveals to you it's like a hypnotic suggestion that was basically brainwashed into you. So anytime
you've been a sleeper
kindly,
agent.
Yes, yeah, you're a sleeper agent the whole time. And anytime someone says "would you kindly," you have to do whatever that is. So, and actually, in the beginning of the game, you're reading a letter that's from "quote unquote" your parents that's titled "Would you kindly," or and so you realize that you're the one that crashed the plane, basically.
Yes. So you did know, you son of a bitch.
Son of a... You're fired.
Well, you fire yourself, kind of, and then you fire the rest of Rapture.
Yeah, you basically kill Ryan, and then you realize that Atlas is really Fontaine, and then you kill Fontaine.
Yes, and he is a giant mutant splice machine thing.
Yeah.
It's kind of a weak boss battle, actually.
Yes.
It's a great reveal, and then you see the last boss, and you're kind of like, oh. For me, the first time that I played it, it's kind of still happens every time. It's I get to Fontaine, and I'm just it makes you, you beat him, and you're just kind of and he can be sometimes a very difficult boss, depending on which upgrades which weapons you've upgraded throughout the game, because you don't have I don't think that there's enough of the power to the people upgrades. You find these upgrades throughout the game in hidden areas, and you upgrade a weapon of your choice, and there's certain weapons that are obviously much more powerful than others, and it makes Fontaine much easier or much harder depending on what you choose to upgrade.
Yes.
And also whether or not you choose to harvest the Little Sisters, which this is part of the RPG mechanic. It's mostly a very linear game, but you do have multiple endings in the first two Bioshock games, and that's based on your moral choices.
Yeah, so you can either rescue or harvest the Little Sisters. If you rescue them, you get less Adam, but you get the good ending if you rescue all the little sisters.
Right, like when you first you have to kill a big daddy, and then you get to the sister, yes. and if you save them, like I don't know how they don't really quite totally explain how you're able to heal them, but you just do.
You're basically absorbing somehow like the atom that's controlling them, but like not to the extent where it kills them. It's weird.
Yeah, and then if you're harvesting them, you're killing them, and you're taking the sea slug from them, and you're getting the full dose of atom.
Yes.
So you're getting stronger, but at a cost of the actual game. Where in the bad ending, it still doesn't totally make any sense with the ending of the Fontaine battle, because the little sisters help you, and I guess because he's been harvesting the atom and he's the reason why they are the way that they are the whole time, that they get their revenge on him, but they help you. But also, if you've been bad, like, it doesn't make sense that they would kill him and then help and still help you. Like, I feel like some of them would go after him and some of them would go after you. But anyway, that doesn't matter. The bad ending, the little sisters kill you. Yes. And the good ending, you do end up escaping Rapture after you kill Frank Fontaine, or after you fight Frank Fontaine and the sisters kill him. Spoilers for anyone who hasn't played this, but honestly, the game has been out for nearly 15 years. So, what are you doing?
So, and
the good ending, you end up the good ending. You save them. You go up to the surface with them, and you give them a normal life, and you just die an old man, and they're all surrounded. They're all like happy that you gave them a good life, and you have a nice life with them. And then there's the neutral ending where not really anything of note happens. Yeah, you're just kind of there. It just ends kind of abruptly, really.
Yeah. When I played it originally, when I beat it, I did the good ending. Like I saved all the little sisters, and you get enough atom from the little sisters for it to be a viable thing. Like, you don't really need all the atom that they give you.
Right. Like, you don't get hosed if you make that choice to save them.
You could buy plenty of plasmids still and upgrade plenty of plasmids with the atom that you get from just saving them. So, it really is the smartest choice. I guess, like, you could technically, like, rush and be like a fucking god by the end of the game with plasmids if you harvest them instead. But you really don't need to beat it, because it's like you said, the last boss, like the fight with Fontaine, is not that difficult.
Right, so, it's more based around which weapons you chose to upgrade, and it doesn't really have like that much of an. Well, I mean, it also depends on which plasmid you upgraded to, but it's more so it's more so on the weapons than the plasmids.
Yeah. I will say one of the better mechanics of the game, I think, is the hacking mechanic. And basically, the hacking mechanic is a mini game where you have to like build these like little pathways with like conduits and or pipes, and get the liquid to like the end, so that way you like actually it's an interesting little thing, and it's actually really fun to do the hacking mini game, and it's actually really useful to hack because you get control of. Especially if you hack like the cameras, and then you get control of the cameras, because they will spot the enemies for you, and enemies respawn in this game.
Yeah.
So if you go to an area and you're there for a while and you kill the enemies and then you leave and then you come back, there could be more enemies there. So it's good to have the cameras, because the cameras will spot it for you and send out like these drones to kill.
Well, they're not always there respawning. It's kind of like they wander more.
Yes, they wander around, so you could clear out a whole area, and then go to like another room, and then come back, and there's like guys wandering back into the area, basically.
Right, but all the regular corpses are still there.
Yeah, they don't like respawn where like the corpses come back to life. It's like just new guys come out and are walking around, essentially.
Right.
The only thing that doesn't, the big daddies I think do respawn even after you save or harvest the little sisters. The big daddies
they do.
Also will sometimes come back. and they'll just be a big daddy there with no little sister, basically.
Yeah,
and what they'll do
lose
is they
their
go
purpose, essentially.
Yeah, they go and knock on like the vents where the little sisters come out, and they'll just sit there and keep knocking on the vent, even though little sister won't come out.
Right, and at the end of the first game, you get to become a big daddy, also.
Yes. Well, and so
which you go into the whole procedure, and you undergo like this vocal cord like mutilation and all this, and there's like a specific smell that they have that the little sisters are attracted to. And you get the suit on and everything, which is very cool. And you do feel like a badass and everything. And your melee attacks are far stronger. Because in the game, your melee weapon is really just a wrench, and then you eventually get other like guns and stuff and plasmids. Yeah. But if you upgrade the wrench fully, it's actually pretty damn strong.
Yeah.
But it's interesting there, which they ended up kind of blowing it a little bit in the second game, because in the second game, you are a big daddy. You're like the prototype big daddy, you're like basically, like your subject Delta, which is this guy who you find out your backstory throughout various tapes. There's a lot of tapes that you can collect in the games too that tell the story of Rapture and all the characters in them, as well as your backstory kind of as well. And like, in some ways, like you hear the science experiments going on that are the brainwashing and the sleeper agent experiments, and then you piece it together later on. Because there's one of the tapes where it's Su Chong it's like they're testing the "Will you kindly" thing on someone, and they give them a puppy, and they're like, oh, it's a cute little puppy, and they're all excited and happy for it, and he's like, now would you kindly break this puppy's neck? And the person's crying because they don't want to do it, but they can't stop themselves from doing it, and that's where they find it to be a success. It's actually really messed up the audio on a lot of these things. Like that adds to the scare factor, is not just the dim lit in contrast with the vibrant lighting. It's like that also has has the settings of everything. It even looks like an oil painting in some ways. Like it has that kind of shine to it. A lot of the artwork of that industrial era painting. But part of the factor is that. Part of the factor is the ambiance, and also just being alone and everything's out to get you. But also, it's not particularly scary, but it will get you here and there with some jumpers. It's got some good jump scare moments, but.
Well, the survival horror aspect is more, I think, also the limit. You get a limited, especially if you play on higher difficulties, you get a limited amount of ammo and healing items, and that definitely contributes to like kind of the survival horror aspect of it, where you have to conserve ammo and pick your battles. And if you play on the lower difficulty levels, you get plenty of ammo and health, and you really don't need to worry about it as much. But playing on like hard mode, you definitely have to be careful, especially when you fight a big daddy. Right,
but then anyway, when you get to the second one, you start as Project Delta, a big daddy, and you end up learning the story. And he's this guy, what's his name? He's like Mr. Topsy, I think his name is in real life or whatever. Yeah. Well, anyway, you're Subject Delta. You're this fellow. It starts on New Year's Eve, 1958, which is when the whole revolution happens with Atlas and everything, where Bioshock, that's the specific point in time where Bioshock goes to, where Bioshock happens, basically, and where Rapture officially goes to hell, is that particular moment in time. And you find out that you're the deep sea diver, Johnny Topside, that's his name. And you find out throughout the game that you're trying to find your daughter, who somehow was gotten abducted and taken into Rapture to become like a little sister or whatever it is. And you're trying to save her, and then in the process, stuff happens, something happens to you, and you end up becoming becoming the prototype Big Daddy, basically. And And the part that I remember reading about it and just saying, oh, that's so cool. You get to be it was so much fun to be a big daddy in Bioshock that I can't wait to be a big daddy in Bioshock 2. So, of course, I bought it day one with a pre-order and everything at like a midnight release or whatever the hell I did. And I remember getting home and playing the game, and at first, you're not that strong. And I'm like, all right, I kind of expected it. And then, but like the Big Daddy's appeal is that they have the drill. And when you're the Big Daddy in Bioshock, you have unlimited drilling capacity. So you're like, oh man, I can just use this over and over, and it's awesome. And then, whereas in Bioshock 2, you have to get fuels, and your fuel runs out pretty quickly until you fully upgrade the drill. And by the time you fully upgrade the drill, you're pretty far into the game, so you don't even feel like a big daddy anymore. You're just like, it just feels like a natural progression if you had upgraded the wrench. Yeah. So, and you die in pretty much the same amount of hits, you take the same amount of damage, even though you're wearing big daddy armor, somehow everybody else is just as strong as they ever were, and it doesn't, you don't feel like a big daddy. You're just you're a big daddy in name only and in appearance, and it's kind of a bummer. Now, I understand that there has to be some level of difficulty and there has to be some kind of a hit ratio, but they should have at least just had you die in a higher number of hits or given you a higher starting health or something like that, or a higher starting defense, or really, the drill fuel thing, I didn't really like that. I could understand if, you had to recharge. That would have been a better mechanic, I think, and you would have felt more like a big daddy. It would have made more sense, because you can't go from unlimited to limited. I get it that it's a prototype, but I felt like it was kind of a cop-out. And
yeah, well, that's what they use the prototype. Oh, well, you're just a prototype. That's why you're not as good as the regular big daddies. You're not as strong as them. Your drill is not as good because it's just a prototype. It is kind of a cop-out.
It is. It's really lame too. It's a lame way of explaining it without having to.
I get it, because they have to make it balanced. They have to make a fair and balanced game. But if they wanted to do that, they shouldn't have enticed everyone with oh, you get to play as a big daddy, and then say, oh, well, fuck you, because you're a shitty big daddy.
Right. You could have been just regular Johnny Topside anyway, and they could have just given you different weapons. And I think everybody would have accepted that. But also, the other thing is, it reuses the same world.
Yes.
It's not like you're in. It's not like you're in thriving Rapture and all of this has happened and you're watching the decline as it happens and it culminates in New Year's Eve. Yeah. It's all it starts with New Year's Eve. It's peak Rapture to the moment of undoing, and then you get knocked unconscious during a bout with a big sister, which we'll talk about in a minute, that you are not supposed to win. And you get knocked out for the sake of the story, and then you wake up and Rapture's already in hell. So you're stuck in the same exact world as you were in the first one. You get to explore new sections of Rapture, which is cool, but also you feel a little bit cheapened because you're part of you feels like you're just playing the same game over again, and that was the big criticism with Bioshock 2, and that's why I didn't like it very much the first time around that I played it, and I didn't even bother finishing it. I played it earlier this year, and I ended up really enjoying it because there's a whole psychological element to it that I just wasn't putting together at the time because I wasn't, because I was fixating too much on the visual aspect and the mechanical aspect, and I wasn't focused on the story.
Yeah. I think a lot of it comes from the fact that it wasn't developed by the same team. And this is kind of a thing that happens a lot especially it happened a lot in the mid-2000s to late 2000s with sequels, is that sequels to games that were really successful were not developed by the same teams that made the first game. And sometimes it worked, and sometimes it didn't. I think in the case of Bioshock 2, it didn't really work that well. Then you have games like Dark Souls, where Dark Souls 2 was not developed by the same team that developed Dark Souls 1, And even Miyazaki, who is like the main director and the head of creative over at FromSoft, who created Dark Souls and Demon Souls, he didn't work on Dark Souls 2. But it was still an okay game, but you could tell that it's very different from Dark Souls 1. It like feels a lot different. And that's, like I said, sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. You have games like, Fallout 3, and then you had Fallout New Vegas, which was a completely different development company, completely, because Fallout 3 was developed by Bethesda, and Fallout New Vegas was developed by Obsidian, and they used the same engine, but I would say New Vegas is probably the better game, So it's just one of those things, Unfortunately, in this case, it just didn't work. It didn't work as well.
Right, and it was really just more down to a decision where the creatives weren't really involved.
Yes.
It wasn't the same creative geniuses. It wasn't the same team, and it was also. I'm sure the project ended up getting rushed, so they ended up having to just work with what they had, and what they basically had was probably an unfinished version of what they had hoped for that they couldn't get to, so they probably had to scrap a lot of it and just said, well, listen, we're just going to have to reuse a lot of old models from the first Bioshock game, or maybe we'll have to use some unused concept art for some of this. And, we'll have to just create a whole new story out of nowhere. And by the way, we have to get this done by Christmas, because it's 2K. So, of course, they wanted to crank something out. So, if Bioshock 2 feels unfinished, it's because it probably is. And it's probably not initially the idea. I mean, they did add the Big Sister, which the Big Sister, as said, this is a prequel to the first Bioshock game. Jack isn't really there yet, or he's being developed or brainwashed at the time or whatever. Well, he's probably gone at this point because you're an adult already, so they're brainwashing you during peak bio. They're brainwashing you during during a boom period of or the boom period of Rapture.
Right.
So they've probably sent you up to the surface by now. And then Bioshock 2 ends up happening where everything goes to hell in a handbasket. But it's nice to see some of the extra models that they have, like the Brute Splicer, and the Big Sister is essentially the Big Sister is the big bad of the big daddies. She protects the little sisters when all of the big daddies have failed. She's the last line of defense, essentially. And she gives off a ton of Adam.
Yeah.
When you kill her. So the other thing about the Bioshock games is with the little sisters, there are two, there's a certain number of big, to get all of the Adam that you can, depending, regardless of which fate you choose, or whichever ending, you either, you harvest all the little sisters or you save all little sisters. There's a finite number of little sisters in each level, and you have to kill the big daddy to get to the little sisters. In the first game, you get rid of the big daddy, you get the little sister, case in point. In Bioshock 2, you get to the big daddy, you get to the little sister, and then once all the big daddies have been wiped out, the big sister comes calling, and she's pissed, and she wants you dead. And she's very fast, and she's very agile, and you gotta stop her, before she stops you, and she can finish you off pretty damn quick. Mm-hmm. If you let it get out of hand. She's especially tough in the earlier parts of the game. Yeah. And also, she has really cool design. I don't think that they ever did a Funko Pop of her, which is kind of sad, because I have the Songbird, which we'll get to, and I have the Big Daddy one as bookend pops, but they never did a Big Sister one for some reason, or at least as far as I know. But you end up going through Bioshock 2, and you do have the moral, and you do end up finding out that, what actually happened to you, and you find your daughter, Eleanor, later in the game, and Tenenbaum is actually the problem now in this one, where the first one, it was more Suchong. now Tenenbaum has become problematic. So you've got the issue there. Actually, does this take place? No, this takes place after Ryan has been. It starts before the events of Bioshock 1, and then I think it later takes place after. That's right. Yeah. So it is a sequel. It starts as a prequel, and then it becomes a sequel, like, very quickly. I'm sorry, I was wrong about that. And now suddenly Tenenbaum has been the problem, who Tenenbaum helped you in the first game. Now Tenenbaum has become corrupted because your daughter is very special, Eleanor, and she, there's something about her, and she's, like, basically become, like, Sleeping Beauty in a way, and they've based the little sisters, they've based the big sisters and kind of the little sister off of her in a way, like she's, like, the genesis of the little sisters in a way, and you've got to stop Tenenbaum, and Tenenbaum is basically, you find out that Tenenbaum, I believe, is her mother, and right, I think that's the case, that it's Tenenbaum that's her mother. Excuse me if I'm a little wrong, but no, Sophia Lamb, that's the one who's the problem. Tenenbaum, no, I think Tenenbaum. Does Tenenbaum die in the first one? I haven't played it in a while. I think Tenenbaum does die helping you, or in the first one, or something like that. But yeah, Sophia Lamb is the problem. She's another doctor there, and you find out that that she's your daughter, and oh, that's right. Tenenbaum helps you in this one. That's right. Tenenbaum helps you because she's the one who takes care of the little sisters, and Sophia Lamb, who is another renowned scientist, she is now an issue. And there's, like, some kind of bond and, like, power that your daughter Eleanor has, and you end up having to, you got to go through the world of Rapture to save her, because Tenenbaum is helping you find her, and possibly saving Rapture and giving her a life and everything. And based on your moral choices, not only of the... this is where it gets a little interesting, where it's not only based on your moral choices to the little sisters, it's also... it's like you meet other members of the Rapture family, and you actually end up, like... You actually end up helping Fontaine become Atlas, I think, right? No, I'm sorry. I'm sorry, I'm getting way ahead of myself. That's in the DLC for Infinite. I'm conflating things. You end up going to you have to help other members of the Rapture family, and depending on what you do to them, because they're not great people either, so you can choose to kill them, leave them alone, or you help them. And if you help, and like their moral choices also weigh a lot too, and you'll know which ending you're getting when you get to the last section, because there's various statues when you're in like this hallucinogenic state, where you see this little sisters kind of through their eyes, or through the Big Daddy's eyes, or basically, where like they're these cute little girls and they're angels, but yeah, you become a little sister for a moment because you share a bond with her, and you see then like you're controlling a little sister, and you're seeing the world how she sees it, because they're very out there, and they say certain things that are disturbing throughout the game, like they see a corpse and they call them angels. And, they think that things are beautiful, and they, like, call, and they, and they view, like, and you don't understand why they're saying this.
And they call Big Daddies Mr. Bubbles.
Yes, they do, which is funny.
Yeah.
And you end up seeing it through the child's eyes, as they're trying to form an understanding of the world that they're in. So they almost kind of make it a game to, like, find the atom, and you see for a moment through the little sister's eyes that you like how you have to, like, just the way that they view the world. So like when you go towards a corpse, like, you know that it is a corpse, but seeing it through the little sister's eyes, it does resemble an angel, and it's elegant and it's beautiful and regal and everything, and you'd now understand why they think that. But also, you'll see certain statues that of the people that you are supposed to save, and based on whether or not you saved them, killed them, or were indifferent, the demeanor of the posture of the statues change, and then you know which ending you're getting, and it's pretty similar, but also Sophia Lamb ends up either living, your daughter Eleanor ends up which you find out that Sophia Lamb is her mother. You end up, she ends up either killing her in cold blood, or she tries to save her and she drowns anyway, or she forgives her and she saves her, and then, your ending is either good or bad, depending on what happens to you. But if it's a bad ending, she ends up killing you anyway with the big sister stuff. Mm-hmm. And you basically have to sink Rapture for good at the end of that. And there's interesting story elements there, where it's the issue between of the separation between a child and the separation of bonds is used in a metaphor in various ways throughout this, and also it's very there's a lot of there's some Freudian elements to it, where it's where, because you're trying to you as a father, you're trying to get back to your daughter, and you're trying to restore the bond with your child, and Sophia Lamb is also doing the same, and Eleanor is a teenager when she is in her cryogenic state, and also being experimented on and everything, and it's the parents trying to connect with their child, and the child is rebellious because she's a teenager. So there's that element too at play, and it's also the parents trying to it's also in one way a parent trying to make amends for not really being there, or not being able to help them when they needed it the most. So it's almost like you're doing this for selfish reasons, and it's also a matter of how what are you willing to do to save your child, and that also hinges on the moral aspect, where it's are you are you doing, and the moral aspect also is part of are you doing this for selfish reasons, or are you doing this because it's a noble thing to do, which that's also reflected in the good or the bad ending, because the good ending, it's, obviously you do all the right things, you save all the right people, you free the little sisters, and you find out that because Eleanor is in this cryogenic and telepathic state, basically, she's hooked up to all these things, and she's sedated, you find out that she shares, the Genesis bond with all of the little sisters, so every time you saved a little sister, you saved a piece of her and restored her faith in humanity and everything. And when you didn't, anytime you harvested a little sister, she felt it. Yeah. So if you hurt or killed a little sister, she suffered a death by 1,000 cuts, and she knew that you were responsible for it in some way. And also, you see her demeanor change a little bit too, because she, if you're getting the bad ending, she resembles more of a big sister by the end. She basically becomes a big sister in a way, and she just goes after all of mankind after she kills you, and you've basically created a monster. So that's another element, is nature versus nurture. That's at play. There's a lot of philosophical elements that they tied into the story, and they wove it in really beautifully. It's just that there were so many other factors at play that I feel like it got overshadowed when it came out. But I think over time, it's aged very well, and I think people appreciate it now.
There's a lot of of philosophical themes throughout the entire series of Bioshock. We talked about a little bit how extreme unbridled capitalism was Bioshock 1, and Infinite had themes of nationalism and American
white
exceptionalism.
supremacy.
Yeah, white supremacy and the worship of the founding fathers as gods, essentially. And it's Bioshock. The storylines and themes have pissed various groups off throughout.
Oh yeah. I mean, we haven't even fully touched on Infinite.
Yeah,
we haven't touched on Infinite at all. Really, we will in a moment.
They've always been controversial, and people have asked. People have asked Ken Levine, what was your intention? Are you trashing America? Are you trashing? He said that he always viewed them as a Rorschach test, basically. He's not trying to say anything specifically. He's just presenting something to people. Here's an extreme view of this. This is what it could possibly be to this extreme. Nationalism and populism to this extreme. This is what it could be. Take it as you will. I'm not criticizing any particular group. I'm just showing you it's bad to be an extremist towards one or the other kind of thing, and it doesn't matter what ism it is, basically.
Right, and also a lot of things that he kept in there of racial overtones and things like that. A lot of things he kept in there for historical context.
Yes,
to make sure that everything felt authentic for better or worse of the time period. Because you're not in modern times. You're in Bioshock 1, you're in the 1950s.
Yes.
You're in the 1950s, you're in the late 50s, early 60s. And that's about the same with Bioshock 2. You start in 58, and then you it ends up becoming, they're not entirely specific, but it's, it's 8 years after, so you're in the 60s at that point.
Yeah.
So you're seeing those effects taking place, and then in Infinite, you're in you're in 1912. So
yes,
there's heavy racial overtones there to the point where in the beginning of the game, there's a whole there's a 4th of July parade, a whole 4th of July celebration basically, and it's and there's a interracial couple that's being put on a stand, and there's all of these horrible. There's this horribly racist imagery, and they're tied up, and they want you to throw a baseball at them, and you're the interesting thing about the third about Infinite, which we'll get to, is that is the illusion of choice. That's a theme, and it makes you question the other games too, and possibly life. But whether you chose to throw it at the couple or not, the events take whatever happens ends up happening, and the ball never gets thrown regardless of what happens. Whether you choose to throw it at the guy who's at the carnival barker, or if you're not very nice and you choose to throw it at the interracial couple, the ball is never released, so no one except you would know which choice you actually chose to make. But the game will still, that moment still plays out as it would. The ball is never thrown, no impact is ever had on anybody, and the events play the way that they would have, which is the constants and variables theme, where they start to get into quantum physics, and that's the fun part. Yes, somehow that game made quantum physics fun.
Yes.
But yeah, the racial overtones is a lot heavier in Infinite, and it's very uncomfortable. at a lot of times throughout the game. Like there's
which
like
it's supposed to be. I mean,
it presents, and it's part of the horror element too, because you're like it's this whole like you're like in a good horror or survival horror game, whatever you want to call it, like you should feel uncomfortable while you're playing it. Yes. You're not like you're having fun doing the right thing that you're supposed to do, and like playing through the game and beating it to see it through, but you're also unsettled, and that's what makes a good survival horror game. Where Infinite is not as much focused on the horror as the other two. It's a lot more brightly lit.
Yes,
but it's more concerned with with all of the overtones and the world building. Not to say the other two were not focused on world building, but I think Infinite has more of a challenge with the world building because you're in a different city, you're in the sky, yes. You're in Colombia, which is this very extreme Industrial Revolution era America.
Yeah.
To the point, where it's like fully it's in fact the opposite of Andrew Ryan's philosophies, where Andrew Ryan is more concerned with full unadulterated freedom of everything, and where Comstock is or who's the Andrew Ryan of that game or world essentially. He is more about control, and he's very biblical, where Andrew Ryan is more of an atheist, and where he's very much a God's person. He's very much a God-fearing man. He is a prophet, a self-proclaimed prophet who speaks through the word of the God, through the word of God, and that's his reason for everything that he does, as extreme as it is. Oh, well, this is what God's told me to do. You question the moral of God, where Andrew Ryan was more vetting people based on their intelligence and their abilities and their contributions to society. Comstock is really just taking anyone who is loyal to him.
Yes.
So there's a big contrast there. They both have levels of They both have extreme levels of narcissism, but Comstock's vision is very different from Andrew Ryan's vision, although they still have the same goal. Mm-hmm. To break free of the world that they were once in, to become a leader of their own world.
Right.
And mold it in their image. The interesting thing, the differences. Well, there's a lot of differences other than just the worlds and the story of the worlds themselves. Of course, in Comstock's world, you get cults, basically. You get they get their own variation of the KKK, basically, which is the Order of the Raven. And it's very disturbing, to say the least, when you're going into that world, when you're going into that section of the game. Although you do get probably one of the better tonics, they call them. Mm-hmm. That's their version of the plasmids, where they're where you drink them. And then you get the abilities, as opposed to injecting them with a needle, as you do in the first two Bioshock games. You end up getting the cooler one, which is the murder of crows, where you just launch ravens at people. It's pretty metal. But that section of the game is very disturbing because it's they worship death, and they also are just incredibly racist. And it's really disturbing. But you do get the better upgrade in the game. But there's also a class war that that's a theme in Bioshock Infinite, which I think that resonates a lot more with today's time now. I think these games have aged incredibly well, and a lot of their themes you can resonate with a lot going on today. Not to sound bleak, but it is what it is.
Well, you know what? And I think it's a good thing that they came out years ago, because I think it came out at a time where, like, we were polarized as a country, but, like, there was still some, like...
Not nearly as much as we are today.
Yeah, exactly.
Like,
there was still some healthy debate. You could still, like disagree with someone, and it wouldn't get into, like, a huge, like, shouting match or become violent. Like,
right, like, political... Yeah, like, there might be, like... there might be, like, micro aggressions, like, about a person's political point of view, but, like, it wouldn't get much further than that. Like it wouldn't get much...
It's not like now where, like, political debates erupt into literal violence at this point.
Yeah. Or
everyone's so polarized.
Yeah, like...
And no one can actually even agree on anything or even come to, like, a middle ground anymore.
Right, like, like at this point in time, the worst case scenario was, like, you just called a person an asshole for whatever they believed in, and you'd, like, walk away, and it would bother you for a couple of days, and then you'd probably, like, you'd probably just, like, hang out after you cooled off. Where, like, now, forget it. It's I mean, you still find a lot of that. I think you find more of that than than the internet and all of this, like, this fake social media world would lead you to believe. There's a lot more, like, central people that you would, like, than they would want you to believe. But you still see a lot of just gone. A lot of that, like, crazy divide where it's like, I don't even want to be involved in this. My name's Paul. This is between y'all. I'm not getting involved. I'm not going to tell you, like, and then sometimes someone will ask you what your thought is, or, like, what your political point of view is, and you're just like, yeah, my point of view is the one that gets me the hell out of this, like, situation the fastest.
Yeah. So it wouldn't. It wouldn't have worked. It wouldn't have worked.
I think it would have been. Yeah, I think there would have been too much backlash about the game before it ended up coming out and being the masterpiece that it is. Exactly. I don't think the world would. I don't think people would give it a chance before it came out,
because they would have been, like, the company would have been too afraid of the backlash.
Especially with a big publisher like. Yeah, especially with a big publisher like 2K, I'm pretty sure that they would, like, put the kibosh on it, and then, like...
Or it would be completely, like, edited and like, completely, like, a watered-down version of what the originally envisioned.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm sure that would happen. But basically, Bioshock Infinite, it's similar to Bioshock 2, where you're going to save your daughter. And you're brought there by these two twins, the Lutece twins, who, they constantly bicker amongst themselves. And it's entertaining, but they're also bickering about, like, scientific terms of things. And they're predicting outcomes of the events and things like that. And it's things, and they're speaking, like you don't realize it, but they're talking shit about you, like, in front of you. And you're just too dumb to realize it. That it's an elaborate experiment by them because they're all in on science, and you find out why later on, and it's very interesting. It all revolves around quantum physics, and it's done in such a beautiful way that you don't even know that you're learning throughout the whole game, and, like, afterwards. Like, you end up seeing the world differently. I don't really know how to explain it other than that, but that game changed my entire worldview on, well, kind of my entire life. It made me question. It made me question whether or not, and I still think about this time to time. It still makes me wonder whether or not I actually did have a choice at all. And you think about and, like, it helps make the other two games whole also, and it adds another layer to the entire franchise.
Yeah.
But like basically, like I said, like you're looking for your daughter, you go through this whole thing, you go up to the big tower where she's being kept. There's this thing called the Songbird, which is the coolest looking thing that they have. It's a giant eagle, basically, but it's a big daddy. And there's only one of them, and you've got to like, and it's this giant thing bigger than a big daddy, and he's her sole protector, and you rescue her. You're trying to get her out of there, and the whole reason why you're even in Colombia, and you get shot up into the sky through a lighthouse, by the way, except you go up instead of down. You have to, like, you're trying to get her to, like, you're trying to bring her back down, and you don't really know why. You just know, like, you're like, okay, well, who is this girl? You know, and then you find out it's your daughter, and you got to save her, and you're just like, well, how did she even get there? And it ends up getting crazier and crazier and crazier the deeper you go into this world. And where you're almost out, and then you can't, and you end up going through all these various doors, and you end up seeing what you think is a different future, but it's really a different reality that you're getting into, and there's an entire class war, which is a large part of the story. There's the Comstock's world is his vision of a perfect world is, you know, just an all-white segregated society where it only benefits the white man, and like every other race is incredibly oppressed. This is his America, basically. This is the most extreme America you could possibly imagine, and it's terrifying. And there's an entire class war between the coalition led by Daisy Fitzroy, who's a badass, by the way. But she is also not a saint either, because she is also too deep into her convictions and her beliefs, which are also very extreme. Like, neither of them are right at their core.
So, I mean, really, it's like the perfect, like, you know...
It's
like,
the perfect storm, really.
I was going to say, it's the perfect analogy of what's our friggin' country is like today. Like,
yes.
Like, you know... You either are like on one extreme or the others, you know. Like,
yeah, like, or at least if you're in office, if you're in a if you're in any political office, it seems as though you're an extreme on one or the other, and that's pretty much what it gets to. But like Daisy Fitzroy, she's trying to destroy Comstock and Comstock's world through extreme violence, and Comstock is trying to keep his just trying to keep it going in, like, with extreme violence and control, and just, you know, not good. And he's doing it behind this whole thing of it's you know, it's God's will, you know, he speaks through me. This is what he said we should do, and you know, all the blind sheep believe it, and they do all this because the whole, like, he becomes the prophet, basically. This girl that he keeps in, this girl that he claims is his daughter is the girl that you're trying to save, which you say it's your daughter. He's right. Like, Comstock claims that she was born from his wife who could not get pregnant. So she was a miracle birth, similar to Jesus. She was a miracle birth, and she was pure, so he saved her because she was very special, and she is the one who is going to lead them into the promised land. You know, like, he's basically saying, my daughter's Jesus. And his wife, and Lady Comstock, his wife, dies, and that's kind of part of why the Order of the Raven exists. That's why they worship death in the coffin, basically, because they believe that, you know, them as a society failed, to protect Lady Comstock. I think he claims that Daisy Fitzroy murdered. Yes, he claims that Daisy Fitzroy, who was the maid for Comstock, he claims that she murdered Lady Comstock. This, of course, is not true. Daisy Fitzroy is ran out of town to the skids, and she creates the Vox Populi, who is the coalition. There's also their own variation of Frank Fontaine, who is Fink. That's his name. Frank Finkton, or something like that. That's not his name. But it's Fink. It's Finkton. And he's the guy who created the tonics, very much how Frank Fontaine created the plasmids, except unlike in Rapture, where Andrew Ryan wants a cut, Comstock just freely lets him do his thing. He's not interested in anything as long as Fink pledges his allegiance to him.
Yeah,
and that never gets out of hand. But you do, of course, end up getting into shenanigans, and your plan, of course, does not go through all the way. The Songbird finds you, tries to kill you, and somehow this lady, the girl Elizabeth, ends up having this mystical power where she has this ability to transport you into different dimensions. And she can't control it at the time, but eventually she's able to. And you find out that that's why Comstock was keeping her up there. It was because she could do all of these things, and he could use her as his instrument at various at the right time to basically take over the world. And she creates a portal. You go into a different universe, and you end up going into various different universes where certain people live and certain people die, but you also start to notice that when one person's dead, the other version of themselves has lost their mind because they share the memories of the person who died. So there's all kinds of crazy things going on where it's almost in a perfect, or what happens when, if there are infinite versions of you and something happens to one of them, it's you lose a piece of yourself, possibly. So it plays with that idea as well, that there are infinite versions of you, and each time one of them dies, you lose a piece of yourself. And there's all kinds of, there's just all kinds of beautiful philosophy in there. That really gets your mind thinking. This game makes you think more than the other ones.
Yes.
Just about reality and existence. There's a lot of Nietzsche elements in there. There's also a lot of David Hume in there, and of course there's just a lot of crazy philosophy going on. That's really, really beautiful. I don't want to continue to really I don't want to spend too much time on the story alone because I really want to focus more on the themes. But basically, you save the day, but not really, and it comes at a really big cost because there is a point in time where you're a private your guy Booker DeWitt. He is he's a private eye, and you're doing this, and you're saving the girl, basically. And you end up, first it's a job to just, go save the girl. The Lutessas you don't know who really put you up to it, but it turns out that it's the Lutessas. And, you're all right, I'm just here to save a girl. And you slowly realize, she's my daughter. And then you end up, and her name is actually Anna. And you're just well, what the hell? Because, your daughter was taken from you, and, Booker DeWitt is an alcoholic, and he was a war veteran, and he wasn't really and he's not proud of himself. He's not proud of the man that he used to be, so he kind of drinks himself away because he got into huge debts, like huge gambling debts, which alcohol and gambling, that tends to happen, especially after a war where a lot of traumatic events happen and, you know, you do unspeakable things and you come back to the real world where, like, you know, it's just regular life and you can't adjust to it. That's another theme, is just trauma and what it does to a soldier. There's a point in time where you choose to get baptized, and you either get baptized or you don't. Like, that's the only, like, there's certain choices in life. Like, this is the main theme, but you end up long story short, you end up realizing that you are Comstock, and Comstock is an alternate version of you, and you're basically caught in a loop, and you're trying to stop something. And in the downloadable content, Burial at Sea, you realize, and you end up realizing that the only way for anything to stop is for you to go back to the beginning, and you just have to be killed before anything can happen. Like, you have to, so you go into a world where you go into a section with all of the Elizabeths, and you find out that there are infinite possibilities and infinite worlds and infinite lighthouses, and some of them you go up to...
Which is based on a real quantum physics theory called the infinite worlds theory, that basically says that there's an infinite amount of alternate universes, and every universe has slight differences.
Right.
And it could be as simple as, like, the wind blew in a different direction on one day, you know? Right.
Or it could be a very significant one, like, for example, the Nazis winning World War II.
Exactly.
Just to throw a very extreme example out there. But the Lutesses, they bicker the way that they do because they are the same person. They're just different versions of themselves that have been able to coexist. So they're both from different universes, and because they're brilliant, they're able to create Columbia, which is the floating city in the sky, and everything else about it, because they're geniuses and they put their brains together and it's the same brain. You just get one, and one has certain one can see certain things that the other can't, and they end up making the perfect equations. Oh, there's fireworks tonight. That's nice.
Oh.
Anyway, there's speaking of, there's fireworks at the start of the game. But the core theme of the game is not just the infinite theory, and it turns out that some of them you go to Rapture and some of them you go to Columbia, but the only constant, it's like the constants is a man, a city, and a girl, right? And in Rapture, it's in Rapture, the man is, of course, Andrew Ryan. The city is, of course, Rapture. The girl is, I think, more the Little Sisters or Tenenbaum. I'm not really sure who they mean by it. I'm sorry. The third one is there's always a lighthouse, not a girl. It's just, there's a lighthouse, there's a city, and there's a man. So, whether you go up or down, it really doesn't matter. You're always going to get the lighthouse. There's always going to be some, evil guy in charge who's gone to the extremes. And there's always a city that goes into chaos.
I always thought it was the same lighthouse that you go to get to Rapture. And
it seems like Bioshock, it is, because you see a lot of the same ones.
Exactly. Well, and that's
they're very similar, in fact.
When I first played Bioshock Infinite, I thought that Columbia was just in the skies above Rapture, basically.
Yeah, I think that's what a lot of people thought until they ended up getting through the rest of the game.
Yeah.
But yeah, it turns out to be much deeper than that, and
yes.
And you only find out that you're Comstock after you've killed Comstock, ironically.
Yes.
Because your nose starts to bleed, which is what happens when another version of you dies. Your nose starts to bleed and you start to get their memories, and then you realize that you're the bad guy. And you've always been the bad guy. And Comstock is actually happy that you're killing him, basically, because now he knows that you're him. So he's been trying to prevent him. There's also this thing called the false prophet, which has these initials that you branded, these words AD, which is Anna DeWitt, and that's your daughter. So that you can, and then that's when you realize that that's what that means, and that Elizabeth is Anna and all that stuff. So like he like that's why everyone is out to get you, because he knows that you're him, because he stole Anna from you to pay off your gambling debt. Because the instructions are give us the girl and wipe away the debt, and that's essentially what they mean. So it's like Comstock knows that you're in serious debt, so he'll make it better because he'll give you all the money because he has it in that world. So it's like it's a quid pro quo thing, and it's really messed up how it happens. And your daughter ends up getting a piece of her thumb cut off, a piece of her finger cut off, her little finger, and that's what through the tears when the Lutezas are able to close the rift. She gets caught because you end up having regrets about it, and you change your tune too late, and then once that gets cut off, because it's cut off by the tear, that's how she's able to get the powers. Anyway, the main theme is really the constants and the variables, and this is wonderful, but it's also terrifying because it'll mess with your head in the real world, especially during a pandemic, where the world is as bleak as it could possibly be. Why did I choose to play this game again at the worst possible time in my lifetime?
Yeah,
I'll never know, because now it's messed me up pretty damn badly. But the point is, it makes you like it's a constant. The constants and variables are basically at like whenever you think that you've made a choice, it may or may not have ever actually been a real choice. Like you may have always been destined to do whatever it is that you did. And in every version of the infinite universes, you do the same thing. And the Lutezas kind of have a bet going in the beginning of the game over a coin flip, whether or not it's going to be heads or tails. And I believe it's always tails. In every universe, it's always the same. And they have a tally marker of when it's not. And it always is.
Mm-hmm.
And they're always like, and part of their spats are always debating on whether or not a certain outcome is going to happen. And it turns out that the universe that you're in is the one universe where you're able to stop things from happening. Is where you're able to stop it. And that's kind of what they're trying to do, is they're trying to stop the monster. So they, from the entire world getting destroyed in general, like outside of Columbia, because you see New York City burning at a point in time. And you realize that the only way to stop that is you have to, there's a point in time where you get the baptism and you choose, whether or not you get baptized or you don't. You don't get baptized, you're Booker DeWitt. You get baptized, you become Comstock. And he realizes he has to go back to the baptism and die. He can't refuse the baptism nor take it. There needs to be a third thing that happens. He has to die so that he doesn't go one way or the other. And he's totally neutralized, and that would destroy, that would be the genesis point where it destroyed all of where it destroys every single Comstock and Booker simultaneously.
Like that movie, The Butterfly Effect, almost.
Yes, it is exactly like The Butterfly Effect, but the constants and variables thing is whatever it is that you did in life on, at whatever particular moment in time, maybe you're thinking about something you did in the third grade, where, I don't know, let's just say your bully was picking on you, right? Your bully was picking on you in the third grade, and there was a choice whether or not you could beat up the bully, or you could just let the bully continue being a bully. And in the world that you're in, you chose to make a stand and you beat up the bully, or you tried to beat up the bully, and whether you got beat and whether you got beaten up or didn't get beaten up didn't change the outcome. In some universes, you beat up the bully. In some universes, the bully beats you up. But what ended up happening was a shift in your character where you took a stand for yourself, and you grew and you became a successful person, right?
Yeah.
Where in the other universe, you chose to just take it from the bully, and you end up having a miserable life, and you just let everyone walk all over you, because that character arc needed, like that character arc needed to happen in your life, and it didn't. So that would be a particular Genesis point where maybe it would have had an impact on whatever happened for the rest of your life. But like that would be considered a variable. But there's also constants, which you were going to, which a constant would be in every infinite universe. You never stand up for yourself. You just don't. You have the choice, but you never make that choice for whatever reason. So then that would be a variable. That would be a constant. So that's essentially what the quantum physics are. And then so like there's like every choice that you make, it calls it into question as to whether or not it actually is a real choice. Like, were you always destined to make that choice, or did you have a real choice? Like, was your life always going to go was your life always going to go the way that it has? Or was there ever going to be an inflection point where it would change the course of your life and create a new ripple effect into a new universe where you do make that choice, and you never know,
you know
and you wrestle with it your entire life.
Well, here's something
if you think deeply into it, which I don't do it as much as I did, but
it doesn't even really matter if the choice, if there is free choice or not, because every choice is made in an alternate universe.
Right.
Every possible outcome is already happening in an alternate, and also, so not to go a little bit off topic, but there's
or in some universe only the same, or in every universe only the same outcome is happening.
Right.
Well, you don't know.
There's an interesting theory. So I think we've talked about the Mandela effect a little bit on the show before, but I don't know if we did or not. I'm pretty sure we did, but if not, the Mandela effect is this phenomenon where people misremember things, and it's like a mass misremembrance. The best example I always think of is the Berenstain Bears. Everyone remembers it as the Berenstain Bears, but it's actually the Berenstain Bears with an A instead of an E.
I actually just remembered the Bernstein Bears.
Yes, no, it's the Berenstain Bears.
Yeah, no, I know that. When we were moving out of my childhood home, we still had those books. My mom probably kept a bunch of them, but I don't know if we.
But everyone remembers it as the Berenstain Bears, though.
Yes, and I remember looking at the books years later and saying, "This is not the right book."
Yeah, well,
which I'm sure many people have done.
So now, everyone, there's like thousands of theories now of like why that is. Like, oh, it's just people misremembering, and it becomes like a popular thing, and all of a sudden it gets implanted in people's heads, and that's why. But there was actually this kid who was like a 16-year-old kid who's like a super genius. Like he like graduated Harvard with a PhD at age 16.
Jesus.
In quantum physics. Super genius. That basically says that the Mandela effect is evidence that the infinite worlds theory is correct. And when the Mandela effect happens and we misremember things, it's because our brains, our consciousness functions on a quantum level. And so we can remember things that weren't happening in our physical universe because it was happening in another universe, because our brains and our memories are in a quantum, like they function on a quantum level, basically. And so we can remember things that happen in alternate universes, essentially, is what the theory is, basically.
I wonder if that creates sleep paralysis. Because sometimes, this hasn't happened to me in a long time. It's only happened a handful of times in my life. But whenever I've had sleep paralysis, it's always been when I'm having a very, very, very lucid dream, and it feels as though it is physically happening. So I wonder if there's, which I mean, but there's nothing. Like, there's a lot of dreams that I have most of the time when I have a lucid dream. Something ridiculous is happening. Like, something that could not physically happen in this or in this world. Just, it's just, like, that's what I'm having a lucid dream. It's always something very absurd. But the few times that I've had sleep paralysis, it's been very believable and very realistic, and there isn't anything out of place to let me know that I'm dreaming. So I wonder if that's not. I wouldn't say astral projection in a way, but it's almost in like where you're visiting, where you're visiting another universe in a way.
And that's also the theory with like when you take like psychedelic drugs like DMT, that you're basically expanding your brain's power, and your brain is able to like observe alternate dimensions essentially. And that's when you see like fairies and elves and stuff. When you take psychedelic drugs, you're actually seeing beings that exist on another plane of existence that we can't see in the physical world, but they do exist in like another different plane, a different dimension, basically. And I like, there's theories now that like our brains are really just like an antenna for our like, the spirit world, or like consciousness, whatever you want to call it, the life force, and our brain like picks up the life force, and when we take DMT or when you dream, your brain is basically drifting into another like frequency, and that's how you're able to detect things. And you're that's almost why living in another.
Well, I mean, that's why it's like everything is energy based. Whether or not something wants to, whether or not they want to tell, whether or not you want to believe it is up to you. But everything is energy based, and everything is based off of vibrations, and that's
100%.
That's basically why people get along and don't get along. It's that you're vibrating at similar frequencies.
There's a fusion in quantum physics. The quantum physicists are now having to like go into metaphysics and philosophy and stuff as part of their like part of their field of study, because what we're dealing with is possibly like the spiritual realm in quantum physics. And it's not saying like ghosts and spirits and consciousness and the soul doesn't exist. It's just or it's magic. Magic doesn't exist. It's like, well, it does exist. We just don't understand it yet. It's a part of science we don't yet understand, and that's quantum physics, basically, and how the universe, like everything vibrates. Everything, we're all in the same field of particles, basically, and we're all just vibrations of the same field of particles. It's
right, and that's all. I mean, and you could feel it a little bit more in the physical world if you surround yourself with nature. If you really like get like,
well, and meditation is
meditation is essential. Especially if you're meditating in nature. Like if you put your I forget the guy's name, but he was on Joe Rogan about a year or two ago. This guru fella who was talking about his like all his spirituality and all of his experiences and everything. He had a book out. I forget. I wish I knew. I wish I could remember the guy's name. But I really enjoyed that episode. But a lot of things that he said, it is true. Like if you go barefoot on, by a tree, and you just sit next to a tree with grass and like the ground and everything, and you really sink your hands and your feet into the dirt and everything, and you connect it, you'll feel energized just by being there. You'll feel a lot more togetherness with everything that's going on. You'll feel a certain way, and you can feel it coming toward you. You can feel energy coming toward you and going through you, and it's very interesting. I also get that effect when I'm by the water, and I mean sometimes I always wonder why I'm drawn to certain. Like you always wonder why you're drawn to certain things at certain points of the time. But like whenever I have like a pier over by me, and it's got it's actually really fantastic for jogging. It's over by the Verrazano Bridge, but there's a pier, and there's just water, and I do whenever I go there. It's always around the same times of day, but I mean, and I know, I know someone's going to write this off, and they're like, all right, well, that's just because it's a habit, and where it's like,
right.
This will be like months at a time where I won't go, but whenever I go, it's always at the same points in the day. It's either around, it's either between the hours of it's either between 6 to 7 in the morning, or between 5 and 6 o'clock at night.
Mm-hmm.
I won't there's usually not any other days where I will go specifically to go to the pier. There's no other points in time where I will specifically go to the pier to watch the ocean and study the ocean for not necessarily a long amount of time, but just anywhere between 5 and 15 minutes. I specifically go to the ocean at that point, at their same exact time, to specifically study the ocean. And I always notice something different. If you look at the water particles, I mean, that's something that they teach you. Well, that I learned in acting school. They when I was taking acting classes, one of the things that one of my teachers told us was every week, just try to find a day once a week, just go out into the world and learn something. And we didn't understand what that meant, and he would always say, what did you learn? And it wasn't he wasn't looking for in 1817 this happened, or well, I learned that, octopuses do this, or whatever it is. He was looking for, what did you learn when you went out into the world and you studied nature? Or when you studied your environment or you studied your surroundings, what did you learn about your surroundings?
Mm-hmm.
And you'd be surprised what you notice. But what I noticed was the ocean. I always notice something different about the ocean, whether it's the colors, or it's the patterns of the sea, or why certain things are happening in the water, whether or not there's a ship in there. Sometimes the currents will still be the same, regardless of what of the choppiness, and it's interesting. Sometimes it's I like how the light always looks different in the water no matter what, and the water is always still calm at the same intersection. There's always a middle of the choppiness where it's always calm. Sometimes the water looks pixelated, and there's various ripples that create that, and it's also the light and other things, but there's colors that I always see a different color. And there's always one different color that I'll see, or there's just always something new that you notice when you're just only honing in on focusing on your surroundings, and you feel a certain type of energy too. But that's, and if you look at trees, you'll see a lot of different things with trees. Every tree has a unique pattern just ingrained into the bark. And it's almost like it has its own personalized tattoo, and it's a very it's just, there's all kinds of things that you notice that when you're just going out with the intention to just only focus on your surroundings, there's a ton of things that you will actually learn about nature, and it's really fascinating. I encourage anyone listening to this to go ahead and do that.
Yeah. Yeah. And, that's all what a lot of the New Age religions, and neo-paganism and Wicca are all about, is this connection and the vibrations of the universe and feeling it through nature and the elements and stuff like that. and again, it's all linked to quantum physics, basically. It's just a different way of looking at it, basically.
Yep.
So, anyway, that was a crazy tangent we went on.
Yes, that was a doozy. I guess to just kind of wrap this up is there is a fourth Bioshock that is on the way finally, but there has been a ton of other things going on, and I've rambled for quite a bit. I guess you could start it off.
Yes.
So System Shock, it's up in the air if we'll ever get an actual sequel.
Yes.
And there's various reasons why. There's also been a lot of turmoil within Irrational Games and 2K and everything as to why it's taken so long to get to a fourth game.
Yeah,
which Ken Levine actually was back for Infinite as a writer, by the way, and a director of the game as well. So that's also why Bioshock Infinite resonates just as strong as the first one, because Ken Levine is directly involved. But also the other thing about Infinite that I failed to mention, I'll just be quick with this, is unlike the first two, Bioshock Infinite does not, whatever moral choices you were going to make do not matter. Whoever lives or dies, it seems like there's an impact on the game, but there's really not. It turns out that most of these things were constant, were variable, were constants, and there were very few variables, and you don't necessarily know what they are, except that you're in the universe where you're in a slightly different universe where there's a different outcome, and they're trying to figure out, and the Lutesses are trying to figure out why. But whatever choices you are presented with, the game plays out the same exact way, so you don't actually really have any choices. There is no moral thing. There is no good. There are no different endings. There's no good or bad or anything. And then in the Infinite Burial at Sea expansion, you then find out that Elizabeth, you go down back to Rapture, and Elizabeth inadvertently realizes that she is directly responsible for both Rapture and Columbia. And the Songbirds and the Big Daddies were made as of studies of each other, and the Handymen and other bad guys and stuff. That's all I've really got to say about that. But you end up finding out the truth, and Elizabeth, she ends up helping Frank Fontaine become Atlas, and she's directly responsible for everything that happens to Rapture, basically.
Yes.
So she realizes that it's just a infinite loop of all of these things, completing Infinite.
Yeah.
So there you go.
So, we had mentioned System Shock earlier. There was an effort to make a remastered System Shock, the original one, and eventually, if that did well, they're going to do System Shock 2. However, it's being developed by Night Dive Studios, they've done a number of PC ports of old games and remasters like Turok 1 and Turok 2. They remastered, and they were actually quite good PC ports of them. And however, they were recently a large majority of the company. Actually, I don't know if it's a majority, but a large percentage of the company was purchased by Tencent. Now, for those who don't know, Tencent is a Chinese investment firm that is basically directly owned by the Chinese government. And they own either majority stock or large percentages of stock in a lot of American game studios and other development companies. So basically, it was announced recently, the end of August. System Shock's owner says that it's now up to Tencent if the sequels get made, because basically the rights were sold to Tencent.
Oh no!
And which means that we might never see the system. I mean, System Shock, the remaster is still listed on Steam. It's still in development. I don't think there's a release date yet. I'm gonna actually take a look at that. So yeah, there is no release date. It just says coming soon. And with Tencent now controlling it, who knows if we'll see it, and who knows if we'll see a System Shock 3 or the System Shock 2 remaster. It's hard to say, unfortunately.
Well, it would be nice if we get it, but it is very unlikely.
Yes.
Unfortunately.
Yeah.
Like everything, like System Shock 3 was apparently it was becoming well done. It was like they were really getting somewhere, and then COVID hit, and that's when Tencent ended up buying them out, essentially. And then the one of the main guys behind it, this guy Warren Spector, he ended up not working on it, and the game development team had just been laid off. So they ended up so we have no idea what the hell is really going on.
Yeah,
unfortunately.
Ken Levine's, his new company is
Cloud Chamber. Actually, no. I'm sorry. It's not Cloud Chamber. Cloud Chamber is the company that
Ghost Story Games.
Yes, Cloud Chamber is the new company developing Bioshock 4. That's right.
Yeah. So Ghost Story Games is Ken Levine's new company that basically was spawned out of Irrational Games, and unfortunately, they've been trying to make a new game, but it's stuck in development hell, and apparently a lot of the employees kind of have left because of burnout. So, it's hard to say if we'll ever see any kind of thing ever again from that.
It's probably one of those things where I don't want to assume, but my guess is that Ken Levine, because he writes and directs excellent games, but I would imagine that it's almost like a James Cameron Avatar thing, where he needs more funding to make this as perfect or as close to his vision as possible, and he's probably a perfectionist because he has such a grand vision that it's probably been a hassle to constantly get more money from investors to pay for this game, because that continues to stall because he doesn't have the resources. That's the first thought that comes to mind as to why it could be stuck in development hell, and I'm sure there's many other reasons why too. But at the core, it usually comes down to money. So I imagine the game is just very expensive to complete Ken Levine's vision. But I hope that they do make this game, because I'm sure it'll be amazing.
Yeah.
And then you have Irrational Games that closed down in 2014, and that's where it was rebranded as Ghost Story Games. But you have Bioshock 4 coming. They actually I'm actually very excited for this game. We are going to get a female protagonist for the first time. There's been some little bits that had gotten leaked a couple of days ago, actually. So this is perfect timing.
As usual, we are always coming up with perfect timing with the podcast. Somehow.
Yes, for whatever reason.
I swear we don't plan this.
We really do not. We had mapped this out months ago to do Bioshock.
Yes.
Yeah. But Bioshock 4 is coming. Probably not this year. Probably 2023, 2024. And according to the leaker, which I think the studio was formed in 2019, called Cloud Chamber. Not to be confused with Coal Chamber, which is a new metal band that does a terrible cover of Shock the Monkey by Peter Gabriel, which is a terrible song in itself. We've got... Yeah, it's very bad. I feel like it should have been just called Spank the Monkey.
Yeah, it should have been. At least it would have been funny then.
Yeah, at least it would have not been as much of a disaster. It would have been people would have at least known not to take it seriously. But you've got Cloud Chamber, which like Take-Two Interactive, or 2K, whatever you want to call it. In 2019, they spun it off and created this new division. And like they created a new division because they wanted them to develop the Bioshock game, because 2K, owning the property, didn't want to leave it to die. They were like, oh no, we have a really great franchise here, so let's keep it going. But let's try to keep it away from like just a regular 2K label, because 2K over the years has become more focused on sports games, and they're more known for sports.
Yeah.
So they were like, okay, well, this doesn't even fit the mold anymore. So they created Cloud Chamber. So they spun it off and turned it into Cloud Chamber. And the Cloud Chamber is making Bioshock 4, which Ken Levine is not involved in this. So that's hopefully, which, I mean, some people are a little nervous about it because people did not receive Bioshock 2 well for a similar reason. But this is led by Kelly Gilmore. He's a former executive producer of Firaxis Games. But they're making the Bioshock game. We're getting, and several members part of the original Bioshock game are part of the studio, including a few key people there, like Hoagie de la Plante, Scott Sinclair, Jonathan Pelling, excuse me. So we're getting the fourth Bioshock game. And the original art director has come to the game as well, which is great. So it's at least going to go. It's at least going in the right direction. But there was a leak a couple of days ago. They have been hush about everything. The only rumor at this point, up until a few days ago, was that it would take place in Antarctica, which we have now, which the leak has claimed. Yes, it is going to Antarctica. The name of the leaker is Oops Leaks.
I wonder if there's going to be references to, like, there's a lot of references of, like, UFO lore and, secret bases in Antarctica and the entrance to, like, the Hollow Earth and stuff. So I wonder if that's going to kind of be the theme of, or the setting of Bioshock.
I could see that. So what the leaks claim, and these are leaks, take them with a grain of salt. None of them may be true by the time we end up getting this, but this person has brought forward some concept art. I mean, for all we know, we got a good, they had hired a great concept artist, and they're just none of it is true. But it seems as though the female protagonist is there. It's a British person who is coming there to investigate or whatever it is. They're there. Someone named Shackleton is involved. They're going into Antarctica, and what this info is saying that this art is supposed to be coming from a internal presentation slide and a new logo and everything. And what's supposed to happen is Take-Two, like 2K, Take-Two, whatever, Cloud Chamber, whatever you want to call them, they're taking their time with this. The game is going to be massively huge as a world, which that's kind of the standard for every game. Just make it bigger, make the world bigger, which I don't think is necessary. I care more about a better story, and a meaningful world building. Doesn't have to be a massive world. Sometimes you can make the world too big. Like in Grand Theft Auto games, it's like sometimes you're just never going to explore the entire world, and it's kind of a shame. This game is going to return multiple endings, but it's going to feature an open world with a main story. So I don't know. I don't know about the Bioshock Grand Theft Auto kind of idea. Because a lot of the main story, a lot of the plot points from the main story, you would be getting you would be unlocking parts of the lore via side quests, which I don't really love that. I like getting all of the story right there. I don't want to have to find I don't want to have to do more than I need to get the whole picture. I like the way that the games play out currently. I don't think that's necessary, and I also don't think that the world being that big is necessary either. But that's what the doctor is apparently ordering, allegedly. And we're getting multiple endings back, which is good. The game is using aggregate states of water as an underlying theme. And its principles are playing a huge role in the plot and lore. And they're going to change up the combat system with, in some ways, the terrain is going to play a factor in how the combat plays out, which I think is cool. The game will also get alternate versions of familiar characters from previous games. We're also going to, the main point, the point of the plot also is going to be, and this is the part where I think is interesting, is that we're going to be getting, as a main plot, these are going to be people who are refugees going into one of two cities, the Aurora City and the Borealis City, which, the Arctic Circle joke, and that's... So you would be a Soviet slave in Aurora, and then you're making your way to the, which Aurora would be like more of the refugee underground city, basically, and you're going to the above ground city of Borealis, and you're trying to make your way. So it's maybe there's a Dante's Inferno theme going there, or the Divine Comedy theme in there, and the goal of the game is to unite the two settlements. And the people who are going to be the people who will be the citizens of Borealis and Aurora and I'm sure we'll be seeing a class theme as well, and a Cold War underlying theme too, I'm guessing. Especially if Bioshock 2 takes place in the cities, it would be a logical step as a sequel to go into the 70s, where we get into the Cold War and 80s. So that would also be interesting to see, and if the music would match that would also be interesting to see as well. Because they do if they want to keep the historical factors in there, that would be really cool. But I would imagine that we're also going to be getting we'll also be getting a class war between Aurora and Borealis. But the people who are going to be the citizens are going to be survivors of Rapture. Mm-hmm. So that's also another interesting factor that we'll be getting in there. So it's going to be what happens to the splicers that you didn't kill, or the people that were able to not become splicers, because we see that there are people who are, they're rattled, but they're still them throughout the games, and they're people that you have to save and whatever, even though they're very shaken and they're, not really in the best mental state. But in Rapture, who the hell is? There are survivors in there, so this is interesting to see a whole nother dynamic of what happens with them and why are they out to get you, and what have you, and what's the story there. So I think that would be very interesting, and it would probably there might even be a thing to that might be a thing of the Hollow Earth theory, or at least the idea of playing with that might be involved. But I would like to see that. But this has of course been tumultuous because a lot of the game was originally going to get an announcement at the beginning of the year, and it didn't get that, and they laid off a lot of people in the studios. It's back up, but it's there's a lot of people leaving and what have you, so, I hope that it's okay. I'm sure it'll be fine. I don't know for sure, though. I'm hoping, I'm going to keep my fingers crossed, but it seems like an interesting enough concept for me to be willing to play it and give it a try. There's certain things that I don't particularly like, but I think it'll be okay for the most part, as long as they keep the spirit there, and that they do what they need to do. But this I'm not excited about, and then I guess we can wrap it up. But there is Netflix is making a Bioshock movie adaptation, and
God. It's gonna suck.
I know on the Twisted Metal episode we we were going into the Twisted Metal show with an open mind, but historically video game things are terrible. Like video game adaptations are terrible, but also Netflix doing live adaptations of things are usually horrible. The Netflix Castlevania is the exception.
Well, it was a cartoon. It was like,
it was an anime, so it was still good. But then you have the Netflix Death Note, which
and the Netflix
atrocious,
Cowboy Bebop.
And the Cowboy Bebop, also awful. I think the Netflix Bioshock is going to suck. If it had a chance of being good, it would be good as a prequel to focus on Andrew Ryan.
Yes.
And I mean, they have the Resident Evil show that just got canceled. Yeah. So, yeah, there you go. After one season and after like 3 weeks of it, it wasn't even out for a full month and they chose to cancel it. I'm sure
casting was so bad.
I don't even know. I watched the preview. I thought it looked okay from the way that the preview was cut, but I didn't bother watching it, so I have no idea.
Well, you know, the messed up thing is that like everything about it looks so low budget. It looked like a fucking bunch of people cosplaying as Resident Evil characters.
Oh,
basically.
No.
Yeah. That was like the major complaint about it, and they never fixed it. They're like, nope, too bad, that's what it's going to be. And it's like, well, this sucks. And
they basically did what they. So they basically did. So it was basically like Sonic if they stuck to the original, decision and didn't bother listening to the fans. Which the Sonic movies are great, by the way.
Yeah,
they were the most pleasant surprise that I didn't know that I wanted, and now I really, I would like. I'll probably watch them several times and still enjoy them. But I think the Netflix movie is going to suck because they're probably going to change a bunch of things. It's probably going to be stupid. I don't want to see Jack being developed. I would much rather see a prequel show of Andrew Ryan being challenged on the surface world, leading to him becoming an entrepreneur. Yes, I would.
Rapture would
exactly leading up to the 1958 New Year's party that destroys everything. Yes. That I would like to see spread out over a couple of seasons, but we're going to get a shitty movie. I would imagine we're going to get a shitty movie. I don't have high expectations for this. I don't even care who's attached to this because whoever is just you better throw a hell of a Hail Mary. You may even need the holy hand grenade of Antioch to save us from the killer rabbit that is the Bioshock live action movie. So hopefully they'll do a good job with it, and I will be wrong and pleasantly surprised, and it'll be great. But I don't think so. My only like we said, the Twisted Metal we're a little more optimistic because Twisted Metal, the sky's the limit as to what they could do, and they could further develop characters because they barely ever developed any of the racers except for Twisted Metal Black, really.
Yeah.
So it's perfectly whatever they choose to do, it's got potential to be really good because there's not much of a bar. As long as it revolves around the racing tournament, then it's fine. But with Bioshock, there's too much. Like Twisted Metal, there's a lot of room for error and creative direction. Where Bioshock, there's very little to no room. And I think Hollywood's gonna do Hollywood things, and producers and executives, which we've mentioned on the show, most of the time are idiots who don't know what the hell they're doing. Will probably have that, and and it's very likely that it's gonna suck. I think Bioshock 4 will be pretty good, but I think the first one, I think the predecessors will always shine through as the most regarded. I would say maybe this becomes a lot of people's second favorites. I don't see it becoming the favorite for too many people, but I think it'll be fine. But I don't have high hopes for the live action show or for the live action movie. Mostly because it's Netflix doing this and they have a bad track record, but also it's a video game live action adaptation. 9 out of 10 of those things fail miserably immediately. Like, most of them are dead on most of them, they're dead on arrival from the trailer. So they're dead on pre-release.
Yeah.
So we'll see. We'll see.
We'll see, but that'll probably be the case.
Yeah, but anyway, I think we've said all we need to say about Bioshock. It's an excellent series. There's more that we could probably talk about, and we can go into heavy philosophical discussions on the game and find other themes and other things. But it is unbelievable. Ken Levine, what a mensch, a good Jewish boy from Queens who done good, very well. He's an icon in the video game development world. I hope that his new game comes out. I hope that he's able to get Ghost Story Studios to like really make the fantastic game that they should and can. No pun intended. And I really just cannot wait for Bioshock 4 because we'll see as further things develop. Again, these leaks are leaks, so they may not even be true at all. And maybe we'll be in Panama in the 17th century. I don't know. And we'll just build the canal and like you'll have to fight a weird Teddy Roosevelt guy. I don't know. And you'll fight oxen or something, like mechanical oxen, and you'll have to save tree folk. I don't know. I have no idea what they're going to do with this game. But I think it'll be interesting to see what comes out. I don't have, game wise, maybe don't pay. Maybe with Netflix, pay no attention to the man behind the curtain, but. Because it may just be a clinking, clattering collection of collagenous junk, or maybe I'll be pleasantly surprised. But this franchise is unbelievable. It will change the way that you think. It also makes you wonder if you ever had a choice in any of the real games, and the only choice you ever really had was to just not play the game. Which. Why would you do that?
Play the game!
Yeah, play the game. But for many of you, in whatever part of the world you're in, it is time to play the game, so you should play the game. And just check out Bioshock, check out System Shock. Maybe maybe yes, it is. Moral choices matter.
Yeah.
It's all about control and if you can take it from Comstock. And all about your shot, and if you can, like it's also about pain, and it is about who's going to make it, because Booker DeWitt brands his hand, and you turn into a big daddy, and you get your vocal cords messed up. It is all about those things. It's all about the game, and that's Bioshock.
Yes,
I've been Chris,
and I've been Rob,
and this has been Why Does This Exist? Remember, question everything.
Good night, everybody.